Hello there, my name is Bernardo Escobar, and today I'm going to be painting the Obi-Wan Kenobi Mythos premium format figure by Sideshow. Let's get started. Okay, to begin with, I'm laying down my base coat of flesh, making sure I get everything around the head, behind the ears, under the nose, just everywhere, making sure it's coated. After laying down the base coat, next step is to stipple with a transparent raw umber sepia tone, and that way it breaks up the flesh, like he's got pores, making sure I cover the entire head. Next, I mix up a lighter flesh tone, giving it some lighter highlights and kind of toning down the stippling. And once I'm done with that, I'll mix up a yellow ochre wash and go ahead and apply that to tint the flesh and give it the yellow kind of a base. And it's going back and forth. And then I like to make sure what pulls up I'll clean off. And once I seal that, I'll come back in with my red and making sure I slather that on there and stippling it off so it doesn't pull. Get a good tint on the whole flesh. Making sure I get every nook and cranny. All right, now that I'm done with the red, I get my trusty denatured alcohol and spritz to break up that red. This gives it that capillary little veins that everyone has in their flesh. And I'll go ahead with my sponge and kind of dab some of that alcohol off. And then I'll go and clean up some of the hard red water spots that alcohol can tend to do. So I'll go ahead and clean a lot of that up and smooth it out. And once that's all done, I'll go ahead and seal it. And then I come in with my blue wash and really quickly just slather it on and then start taking it off with my sponge. You don't want it to pull because it can stain, and just gives it the cool undertone in flesh, which I like to do with all my characters. And then I'll go ahead and add more of a red wash onto the beard because a lot of it can get missed. Next up, I'll mix up a lighter skin tone to add highlights and tone down the washes. When I'm done adding the highlights, I'll mix up a blush color and I'll go ahead and start airbrushing under the neck and all the shadow areas. With this, I like to add depth around the cheeks, the beard. Now that I'm done adding the blush color, I like to block in the beard to get a good bead on how everything is working together. Kind of helps out a little bit more to see where I want to go at the flesh, how light I want the flesh to be, and what I'm going to add, because he's going to have different layers of hairs on there, which I like to do. Next step is feathering flesh. Here I'm using the airbrush to blend flesh into the beard and make it more cohesive, and so there's not a stark line. And once that's sealed, I go in and start adding the red tones around the nose and start giving him more depth around the ears, where the blood settles around. Just to give it some life, helps give the portrait some depth, especially in the ears, darkening and all that, giving it some shadow. And then I go ahead and, start really cleaning it up. A lot of this is going back and forth and seeing where the portrait is at in skin tone. And then mixing up a yellow and misting it all over. Giving him a tan, looking at the reference, because he's out in the sun, and I just want to warm him up. I'll add the hair, which is dark, so it kind of frames the face. The skin tone might be too light, so here I am going back and forth with washes. And just looking at the reference and picking out details on Ewan McGregor's face, and kind of give it that sun-kissed look, but I also have to darken, the wrinkles. I'll go back and forth, just to get it to look right. When I see that the flesh is pretty close, I'll go ahead and start adding detail to the hair to give it depth, blondes, browns. And with him, with the reference I'm going with, he's got such cool hair, I just bringing out the sculpt. Next up, adding a transparent orange-brown wash to the wrinkles to darken his flesh tone a little bit and make that detail pop. Adding sunspots, 8 spots with the wash. And then going into the lips. So blocking in the lips with the light burgundy, and then cleaning up as I always do with my trusty toothpick, and then going back over to start tightening up the lip color. And once the hair is dry brushed and detailed, now I start going and striking in the flesh into the hair, and then also just going back with different tans. This process blurs the seam line from the sculpt. After doing the flesh blend, I mix up a brownish red and blend that flesh into the beard around the frame of the beard. So now I'm cutting in with another flesh color that I mixed up, and you get the little striations, the flesh into the beard and then the beard into the flesh. And I'm dry brushing a lighter blonde color over the whole thing just to break it up a little bit more and get that detail. Striking in, making sure I get all the lighter color blonde hairs in there. After detailing the hair, I come back with my burgundy shade color and start toning down all the dry brushing and whatnot that I did with the beard and the hair. Like I said, it's going back and forth and trying to tie it all together. Going in, striking again, making sure everything's cohesive, and with always checking the reference to make sure the flesh tone is going in the right direction. And looking at behind the scene footage, you could see that he's been in the sun. So I'm trying to achieve that, going in and being loose with a lighter flesh and picking out some of the sun spots and just, breaking up the skin tone and adding highlights here and there. Next, adding the final tan blonde color to the top of his head, giving it the directional lighting we like. Picking out more detail, pushing the highlights and pushing the shadows just to start giving depth to the portrait. Going in with washes to darken some of the areas and bringing out that sculpt, forcing the shadows under the beard to give it dimension and pop, depth. Next, I start placing a shading gray for the eye placement, making sure it's good to go, and then kind of detailing around the eye. I like to darken under the eyelid to give it some depth with a reddish brown color that I'll mix up really quick, and going back and forth, cleaning up that iris and just blocking it and make sure it's in a good place. Once the shading gray for the iris is placed, I'll go ahead with adding my black iris color, framing out the iris, then mixing up my blue-gray color for his eyes. Once I get the base color blue, I lighten that color, and then I start doing the detail work in the eye, adding striations with that same color. Then I'll even lighten that even more, and I'll just go back and forth to make sure it's at a good place that I like. But a lot of layers going on. Then I add my pupil, make sure it's set, making sure the eyes are even. Yeah, we don't want them to look cross-eyed, so it's always going back and forth. So the final step in the portrait is adding my layer of satin to the eyes across the whole eye. And when I let that dry, I'll go ahead and add a little bit of satin to the lips. Once I add the satin to the eyes, last step of the eyes is I like to add 2 layers of gloss to the iris and pupil. That way it gives it a domed look. It gives it more dimension and more pop. And I'll do 2 layers of that and then call it done. And there it is, the Obi-Wan Kenobi premium format figure all wrapped up.